Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Mojito Movement. And today I'm joined by James Collier, who I will get to introduce himself very shortly. But as is customary, we start the podcast with a cheers of the Mojito. So cheers to that.
Cheers, Paul. Good to be here, sir.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. I think this is going to be it's going to be a really good episode. I've got a really good feeling about it. So before we dive in head first, introduce yourself to everybody. Tell them who you are and where they can find you.
Great to be here, Paul. Thanks for inviting me on. My name is James Collier. I am most known as Huel co-founder and nutritionist, but I'm a registered nutritionist, former NHS dietitian. I've also worked in the bodybuilding and fitness world for a lot of years, and more recently, author of a book. 7 weeks ago, Well Fed came out, which we can talk more about in a while. I've got over 30 years experience in the nutrition world with a clinical background, with a sports and fitness background and food industry background, and more recently, this thing that you and I both do. I can't think of a better term. I call it being a nutrition communicator.
Yep.
So because that's what we do, we communicate nutrition, and by that, it's obviously got the book, the writing. I write a Substack. I go on podcasts like this. This is my 42nd interview since the end of November. And I do the social media stuff as well, like you do, but completely different style. And I think we should talk about that. And anything where anyone will have me talking a load of rubbish about nutrition and sustainability and stuff like that.
Excellent, and it's a real pleasure to have you here. And I think, again, to set the scene for everybody listening, because I guarantee there's a few people that have followed me for a while that will be listening going, hold on a minute, he's got the guy from Huel on, doesn't he hate Huel? and I think it's worth addressing the elephant in the room, because actually this came about because you reached out to me after seeing a piece of my content. About it was a post about Stephen Bartlett, actually. And I've got a couple of questions that I'm sure will come up later on in the podcast around that side of things. But yeah, you reached out and posed a few questions in terms of obviously some statements made, just in terms of my views and obviously around not just Huel, but obviously the meal replacement industry in general. And we had a really good chat, a really good exchange of messages and
WhatsApps, and became friends. And you invited me on here, and I think, yeah, great. Let's talk about it, and I think we should. I think that should be a key part. And I think your listeners will also be keen to know the reason why I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't shoot a message to the Tonic Healths and Eddie Aboos of the world like that, because it's not worth it. Although I have had a private message exchange with Tonic Health. But it's because you're a good faith communicator, Paul, and you describe yourself as evidence-based, which is why, unfortunately, or fortunately, actually, we should hold each other to a higher account than we would the ultra-crepidarians of the world. I don't know if your views are on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's part of being an evidence-based content creator is that you've got to be open to conversation at the end of the day. That right. If you're not open to conversation, you can't be fully evidence-based, because to be evidence-based is to formulate opinions based on the information and the facts at hand. Whereas if you're what I like to call a zealot shit cunt, you formulate opinions in spite of the evidence that you have to hand. And I think there's a lot of people out there that like to portray stuff as your opinions as fact, and their response to evidence being raised that may contradict it is to either ignore it or make you feel stupid for for listening to clinical studies and what have you. Whereas my viewpoint has always been from minute one, I am evidence-based. I am led by the information that there is to hand, and I think that there's multiple ways to help individuals. There's no one size fits all, and my entire ethos, as we've discussed on message, is to help people find the best way for them as an individual, and that when you take that approach, there is no ability to say this is the best and only way. So conversations like this, I think, are essential, because it's going to demonstrate perhaps slightly polarized viewpoints on how to achieve the same common goal. And neither is right nor wrong. And actually, we said on the message, and we will come on to this when we sort of dig into Huel a lot more. But a lot of the issues that I have with that I've raised with Huel is not so much with regards to the products themselves, or even those who use the products. Quite often it comes down to the interpretation of the messaging. And that's not aimed at Huel exclusively. It's an industry-wide issue with regards to certain types of products. But so I think there's going to be a lot for us to dig into. But before we start, obviously you've given a good background in terms of who you are. I think and kind of your journey so far. I think what would be a really good place to start would be to understand actually when it comes to Huel in particular, because I think this is where we'll have a lot of similar opinions, but some slightly different ones. I would love to know what your initial vision was for Huel, and if you feel that with the success of the brand and its rapid growth, whether you feel that actually it still reflects your initial views and intentions.
That's actually the second part of your question there is actually really good. Nobody has asked me that before, and I think it's really good. And I'll tell you why I think it's good in a moment. Respond to something else you said earlier, like as well. You and I, Paul, are going to agree on a lot. That's just boring. We want to focus on the things we disagree on, right? I think people might get a. I'm hoping your listeners will come away with the wrong opinion of this interview, because they'll focus on those guys that didn't agree on much. That's because we're only talking. We're only going to focus on the things we disagree on and try and find some cause for agreement and maybe not. Your point about conversation being key is absolutely important. Nutrition, I was quoted in the Guardian newspaper recently. I always pick the headlines, and I said nutrition nutrition is more polarizing than politics. Now, that is not something I can back up with evidence. If we're going to talk about being evidence-based, it's a hunch, it's conjecture. And I see this a lot, and I don't know whether it is more or less, but it's certainly as polarizing, because people don't have conversations, which is why, I jumped at the chance of having said, here's a guy that I look at his content. I mostly agree with this guy, but there's enough there to have a great conversation. I've been on a number of nutrition podcasts recently, and some of them have just been people I completely agree with, and it's fine, it's cool, but it's just no fun, is it? So yeah. So let's address the first part of your question there. Background of Huel. So Huel was not my baby. It was Julian Hearn, who's the principal founder of Huel. He came up with the idea. He'd already made some money on his first business. He comes from a marketing background. He found me, commissioned me to come up with the initial recipe, which is an earlier version of what's now the white pouch powder. I came up with a recipe. We worked together for a year, and we launched in June 2015. The initial goal was to provide something that was plant-based, that provides all nutrition in a convenient form. If anyone ever listens to Julian on some of the podcasts, you can see where he came with that idea. I've got to know the guy obviously really well over the last 11 years. And I know how he thinks. It's quite different to me. It's very different to me. He had already made his money on something to do with marketing. His next venture, he was doing like diet comparisons, and he was looking at preparing food. And he thought food prep is so hard work, but what's the easiest thing is protein shakes. Why can't we do everything in a shake? And that's how sort of the idea of Huel was born. He commissioned me, and I came up with something that's nutritionally complete, which we can talk more about that in a moment if you want. Now, I come from a human nutrition background, both clinical and the fitness industry. That for the first 23 years of my career, that was all it was. Then when I started doing this, and we made it plant-based, we did talk with the idea of doing it based on animal proteins, but we didn't, and I'm so glad we didn't. But I was then forced to look at the sustainability side, and we should talk more about the word sustainability later on, and the environmental impacts, because we were making these claims and we needed to back them up. So I started working with people who are more expert in that side of the food system. And the more and more I realized, the more, look, because like you, I like to read a lot of research. I'm a proper science geek. And I thought, if I want to be intellectually honest with myself, I have to change the way I eat. Now, I'm not wholly convinced by the vegan argument, and I have if anyone's read my book, in the last chapter, I have a right argument with myself about whether humans should be vegan, and I put that argument on a physiological basis, on a psychological basis, on an anthropological basis, and even a philosophical basis. And everybody is going to be disappointed. The vegans, the carnivores, paleos, ketos, everyone's going to be disappointed with my argument because I failed to find an answer. And the rationale behind that, people can see if they want to read more, or even look on my Substack. So I changed the way I ate in 2019, and by limiting the amount of animal-derived ingredients I have to around about 10% of my calories. And for perspective, the Western average is 28 to 30%. But also, when I was looking at the environmental side of things, I started looking at intensive farming of animals. Now, so I made an ethical perspective. I put an ethical spin on it as well, and thought I would try my best to avoid intensively farmed red meat and poultry, as well as limiting the amount. Now, the term ethics, that's subjective, right? What you deem as ethical, I will have a different opinion on. But
and on that, just very quickly, it's always a question that I raise in terms of the hardcore pro-vegan community. Obviously, we don't want to kill or consume or have anything to do with any living being that's basically lost its life, and you can flippantly look at that and go, well, plants are also living things. So again, the ethical stance is that they just draw their line at what they're willing to kill and eat and use for making clothes and stuff at a different point to where those who are happy to have animal-based products do. So I always find I completely get and fully understand and appreciate and respect the ethical stance for people who are vegan because of from a more ethical standpoint. And I personally feel that actually that's probably the only and most compelling reason to be vegan, is from more of an ethical standpoint. However, again, you can spin ethics however you want. I'm sure there's plenty of people in the carnivore community that will be sat there going, oh, well, actually, you shouldn't be killing plants because of X, Y, Z, and you can spin it however you want. So I think you raise a really good point there, that ethics in general is a very subjective.
It's subjective, standpoint. Right? But I do understand the utilitarian argument on ethics that some vegans come up with, and the consequentialist argument. But the thing is, if you look at consequentialism and expand it out in the utilitarian ever expanding circle, then it kind of actually does fall down. Because let's take, unless you're a home growing all your vegan produce, it falls down, because if you're harvesting big crops, you're going to be killing animals, number of lives, all the small. Let's take insects out of it. There's still going to be rodents and stuff that get caught in combine harvesters. I don't want to go too much down that rabbit hole. Excuse the rodent related. but all I'm pointing at is the complexity in that argument. Where I actually think the vegans argument is strong is the environmental concerns, because we do know, despite what the carnivores would have us say, we do know the impact of animal farming is greater than plants on a calorie basis, on a gram of protein basis. Now, but there are reasons which I tackle at length in the book. Is like I'm not wholly convinced by the vegan argument. Now, this led the Guardian, same article, the quote in the headline this time was like, I get hate from both sides, carnivores and vegans. Now, I had to go back and, I get a lot of vegan love because I've created a product that vegans can enjoy. But I have that was coming from when I put videos out about saturated fats. Well, I take a very middle of the road view, and I literally have, on some of those videos, I've had hate from both sides, because neither of them are re-listening to my argument. They're hearing what they want to hear. You'll get this with the content you put out. The carnivores were hearing like pointing to the evidence saying, that saturated fats are associated with increased risk of non-communicable disease, and the vegans were sort of saying, we're in the other side, where I'm saying, saturated fats are okay, and that's the point I was making, but it's out of context. But I actually can find a good argument that we should be vegans. I can't find a good argument that we should be carnivore eaters. And to carry on anyway with the Huel, answer your question, was, so we didn't really have an initial goal with Huel. It was to provide nutritionally complete, convenient, affordable, which is a subjective term again, food with minimal impact on animals and the environment, and we've achieved that. Now, as a I would say my stance is that, to answer which I thought your second part of your question was really good. Has my stance sort of changed? Yes, it has, but I'd say it's changed for the better. Again, better, subjective term, but because I'm now trying to take more of a looking at the sustainability side of it and looking at the ethical side of it, and that led me. I changed my diet in 2019. Pandemic started in 2020. We all got a little bit bored. I started writing essays. 3 of them were on this style of eating. I call it contemplative nutrition. And then a few months later, I thought, these aren't essays. These are this is a book. So I started writing in February 2021. And then there wasn't just the 3 pillars with eating for your health, sustainable nutrition, and ethical eating. There's now 5 pillars. So I broke out eating for your physical health, eating for your mental health, sustainable nutrition, ethics. And then the 5th one, I was sort of about a quarter of the way into writing the book, and I thought, it's not just what we eat, it's how we eat and who we eat with. More the concept of sharing food, meal times. Now, you and your more astute listeners will be saying, hey, there's the Huel guy. Isn't that taking away the meal thing? It could be. It could be absolutely argued that way, but that's not what Huel's about. And we're definitely going to get onto that. So has the goal, the mission changed? Yeah, I'd say for the better. It's the more I look at the food system, the more I look at complexity. Basically, what I've written is a book that tries to get people to consider multiple things at the same time when they make their food choice. It's not just about us. Do you know what I mean by individualism? The sort of philosophical concept of individualism. I'll qualify that for anyone that doesn't know. There is some philosophers and social psychologists that have suggested that in the West, we have a more individualistic perspective. It's very me-centric. It's about, personal gain, doing better, bettering ourselves. More Eastern cultures are more collectivist, where they consider the we. They're more we-centric. Now, I want to make one thing clear. The evidence seems to demonstrate that there are higher standards of living in Western cultures, more individualistic cultures, where people are trying to better themselves and be in competition, as long as they're being respectful. And I'm glad I've grown up in an individualist culture. But what I'm arguing is maybe we can be a little bit less me-focused and a little bit more we-focused. So what we eat, our food choices, we know through evidence that it impacts others. And by others, I mean humans and non-humans, and the environment too. So I feel we have to make those considerations. Now, hang on a minute. Isn't it hard enough going shopping sometimes when you've got some, to your territory now, you've got one influencer telling you to have this, someone telling you to have someone else. Well, yeah, but also nutrition science isn't rocket science.
Yeah.
And that's one of the phrases in the book. I'm doing a lot of book plugs here, aren't I?
Yeah, I might jump in as well. I've got my book on the shelf behind me. It's
stop reading a fat git, is that?
Close.
Kind of. Yeah. So I just want people to embrace complexity. I want people. You were talking about it earlier. The reasons why people choose food is complexity, but I'm expanding it more than just the me-centric perspective. People are different. The food system is different. We are a social species. The choices we make affect others too. Now, there is one part that I'm quite clear on. If you're not in good health yourself, though, how can you take care of other people and the environment? So there's a reason why the first 2 pillars are physical health and mental health, because you have to look after yourself first. And to quote myself again, a diet isn't sustainable if it can't sustain an individual. And this is, taking to some of the extreme climate-focused vegans, especially in the Gen Zs. I have heard of a couple of cases of people gone quite extreme, but for environmental reasons, and they've neglected their own health. And there's been issues. And I use one example, which I've obviously changed to protect the names in the book, in there, and it's quite shocking. So we have to prioritise ourselves. So I think
Yeah, 100%. And I think on that last point, it's really important to raise that, because again, a phrase that I often use is it doesn't matter how healthy you perceive a diet to be, if it's causing you either, you know, physical health related issues or mental health related issues, i.e. it's causing stress, anxiety, you know, damaging your relationship with food and your eating behaviors, that ultimately cannot be considered a healthy diet. And there are so many people out there that take individual diet methods outside of the context of what they were probably created for, take them to the mainstream, blow them up, exaggerate the benefits, and then significantly overlook the negative health consequences. Carnivore is probably the greatest and most relevant example of that at the moment, on the basis that, you know, the diet was originally put together in order to help people with severe autoimmune issues, to try and work out if there were specific foods triggering and exacerbating symptoms. So you strip everything right back to a very, very minimal diet, and you gradually reintroduce food to work out where your triggers are. Makes perfect sense. A few people of note and worth who have perhaps got autoimmune issues jump on it, glamorize it. It suddenly becomes a big trend, and everybody's like, this is the only way to do anything, and this is the best way to eat. But actually, if you were to do it long term, the health implications of eating a very high saturated fat diet, even if your calories are relatively well controlled, you're still going to have elevated LDL cholesterol. You're still going to have potentially elevated blood pressure. You're still going to have many facets that are going to contribute towards a higher risk of heart disease, stroke, and that kind of stuff, which ultimately, whether it's good for losing fat or not, if it's going to increase your risk of serious health conditions further down the road, that cannot be considered a healthy diet. And I think the nutrition industry, and this is definitely a point I'm sure we will agree on, the nutrition industry at the moment does a fantastic job of glamorizing short-term approaches, whilst neglecting and negating to inform people that it is by definition a short-term approach. So people end up embarking on approaches and journeys that they think is going to be the future of how they're going to approach their nutrition, when in reality it's not going to be sustainable for longer than probably a few weeks, a couple of months at most. And this is where the big discourse comes, in terms of people end up feeling lost and not knowing what to do and how to approach their goals. Should they be seeking more health centric behaviors or weight loss centric behaviors? And everything becomes a bit of a shit show, which is yeah,
and it's getting exacerbated by more and more, you know, social media. But this has always been around, right? I'm obviously a little bit older than you, even though I don't look it. And you know, so I'm guessing maybe as much as 20 years difference between us. But you know, the Glucose Goddess program on Channel 4 recently, I don't know if you subjected yourself to any of that torment.
I saw the adverts and I felt so suitably angry just from the adverts that I didn't even give it my airtime.
I watched 45 minutes of the first episode. We were doing a thing at work where we were going to talk about it. There's quite a few nutritionists at work. Once a month we get together and talk about things. So it's really cool. But I couldn't do it anymore. But it reminded me, you know, it actually made me a little bit more optimistic. Let me explain that, because it reminded me when I was working in the NHS like 25 years ago, whatever it was. And we were all coming into work one day and we were talking about this program that had been on Channel 4 the night before. And this is before social media. This is the point I'm making.
Yep.
From someone called Gillian McKeith, who you may be too young to remember.
No, I remember her. She frequently went through people's shit. Yeah.
And all the crap she taught, literally. And it's just the same. It's just wrapped up in a different box. And that's why I'm optimistic, because nothing's changed. From the TV perspective, what has changed? We've got social media shouting louder, being more divisive. We've got people, you know, I know, and I've seen some of your content, and you group a bunch of them in the same sort of bracket. And I want to just talk about that a bit later on, you know, because while there's a lot of information, I think it's important to separate the different sort of archetypes, if that's the right word, of pseudo influencers. Because there are differences. And the other thing I was just going to come back on the carnivore diet that you were talking about, it's not so much the heavy meat intake that worries me, it's what they're not having because of having the meat intake. Well, I'm a big fiber fan, a big fiber advocate, because of the data behind it. And if you're having a mostly carnivore diet and maybe having a few, you know, florets of broccoli, I think, you know, and calling that and a couple of berries, that's not enough. You know, we need a lot more fiber from the point of view of the microbiome, digestion, the links with cardiovascular disease, and I could go on. That's what concerns me the most. And I train at a few different gyms, and one more recently, you get talking to people down there. They find out who I am, and they start talking. There's a couple of hardcore carnivores, and they come up and they're being polite, but I can tell the way they're talking, like they're not going to listen to anything else. So I don't want to be impolite. I'm at the gym training, right? I don't want to challenge them like I would challenge people in a different circumstance about, the evidence for it, because I'm sure they've got their evidence. I'm sure what they've done is they watched their favorite, influencer with their shirt off, thumping their chest, drinking raw milk outside, and getting all excited about it without looking at the evidence. And a conversation with one guy was actually an older guy. And he was sort of saying, categorically went up to me and, in this conversation in a polite way, but said, "Oh, I don't believe, that humans are causing climate change." I'm not going to say, "Okay, how did you arrive at that when you critically appraised all the available evidence?" Because I'm just going to look like a dick. So I just go, "Oh, okay," like that, and just leave it. And that's the problem, isn't it? Have you heard of Brandolini's law?
Yeah.
So if I'll qualify that for some of your listeners, but it's the Brandolini in 2013, Alberto Brandolini, the Italian programmer, made the statement, I think it's brilliant, that the amount of energy required to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude greater than it was to create the original bullshit assertion, right? This is just a perfect example of it, right? And I did an example. I went on the High Performance podcast in December. The episode came out in January, and I was thinking, this is the biggest podcast I've ever done. I want to be impactful. I want to talk about Brandolini's law. So I thought of an example, and this was the example I gave. Instant coffee granules, instant coffee made from instant coffee granules will cause inflammation because you're consuming the whole coffee. But if you have percolated coffee, or all the bad stuff comes out and you're only consuming the fluid, so that's okay. I literally made that up for the purpose of illustrating Brandolini's law. But if somebody was to try and unpack what I've said, they'd have to go and look at all the science behind it. They'd have to look at maybe how instant coffee is made, and so there's actually no trouble at all compared to the percolated coffee. That would take hours, and also creating a video on that would be boring. Something impactful in 30 seconds, that statement I've made, it's shocking, and which sounds scientific if done in the right way.
And this is what a lot of the zealots hang their hat on, is they make very compelling sounding statements, safe in the knowledge that it's going to be far more difficult for somebody to go and fact check them. It's going to take a lot of time, so sometimes it's easier to just accept. And the trouble that we've got is, as you demonstrated with people when they come up to you in the gym, people only really seek confirmation bias. They don't tend to seek evidence. They just want to get that little rush of excitement that people get when they hear a piece of information that confirms what they already thought, rather than having to go and relearn and question the fact that they might have been misled somewhere along the line. And I always refer back to the Ricky Gervais quote that he put out, that he stated, which is that it's only painful in death for those who are left behind. And it's the same with stupid people, because ultimately those who are dead or stupid are not aware that they're dead or stupid. It only affects the people around them. And it's the zealot world and the people that are very fanatical about specific diets and disregard all the evidence. It's exactly that. It's too painful to put the time and effort in to adequately disprove them. So sometimes it's better to just leave them to it. Not least because even if you put the time and effort in to disprove what they think, most people don't accept it anyway. The amount of times you reference a study to somebody and say, look, this completely shuts down what your viewpoint is, and they go, oh yeah, but who paid for the study? It's independent, peer reviewed. Oh well, big pharma. And good argument.
And this is it. We've got this. I'm actually writing a piece at the moment. It's quite hard actually. I've got a bit of writer's block lately, but it's I'm writing on nutrition populism. You might have heard the term recently. It's been thrown around, and I heard it a few months ago, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. The political mindset of populism and everything that entails. Like not trusting institutions, but ironically putting all your trust in one individual or a small group of individuals instead. And it transfers almost perfectly onto the nutrition world. You know, it's from what you've just said. Literally, you said, you know, you talk about peer review and stuff. The peer review process is massively flawed, but it's brilliant because it's the best thing we've got. You know, and if you can accept its flaws, that means you can embrace all the checks and balances in place in the whole process. And people think when they say science, they throw, you know, you get the Gary Breckers of the world. I'm really, really disappointed because they do understand science, right?
Yeah.
At least at a different level, or at least they accept science because they use it to back up their arguments. And but the problem is they're either not reading it properly or not understanding it, or maybe worse, deliberately misrepresenting the paper they do.
Yeah.
And even if there was one paper, even if they didn't, you know, they were referencing that paper correctly. That's not science. Science is the totality of the evidence by way of a critical appraisal of all the available evidence. And I try and view it in a Bayesian perspective. And people don't know what Bayesian reasoning is. It's where you reassess your own prior, i.e. your beliefs on a certain issue, as you come across more evidence on that. Now, if you haven't come across much evidence because you haven't done your homework, then you're not going to reassess your prior. And so furthering to what you've said, Paul, right? People can have their beliefs, and you know, I'm a fair advocate of free speech, although that's a bigger debate. But that's why we have experts. But there's this whole mistrust of experts at the moment. It's been going on for the last few years. It's particularly rife at the moment. It's just depressing. And I'm not just talking about nutrition here, politics as a whole, and it's really, really depressing because people they don't have the skills to review papers. It's hard work to do, and it's piss boring, right? And that's why you leave it to the experts. But then be open-minded, and this is the problem. And I think what you said a few moments ago about confirmation bias and looking at people hearing something that makes them feel good, that's spot on. So it's how do we change? We're not going to give everyone the skills to critically appraise evidence. That's okay, because everyone's got their own lives doing their own jobs, and it's hard enough for them. But how do we teach people the skills to be open-minded enough to just question everything? And by questioning, just like listening to a variety of viewpoints and looking at all the key traits of who's likely giving good information and who's likely a quack.
Yeah, it's such a challenge. And again, you obviously referenced people like Gary Brecker. I think you can split the world of the zealot into two halves. You've got those who have heard things, who have maybe done a small amount of research and obviously achieved an element of confirmation bias, who genuinely believe what they're saying. You then have the Gary Breckers of the world who understand the wider situation and know realistically that what they're saying isn't actually confirmed by the data, but they're able to pull out enough information from enough individual sources to make what they're saying sound compelling enough to make money. And I find with particularly people like Gary Brecker, if you watch any video that comes up of his, everything that he's talking about, particularly when he's talking from like a health and a fat loss perspective, it's amazing the number of things that he has claimed are the best and only way to strip fat from your body, that A, conflict his previous statements, but B, also relate to a product of which he sells, whether it's his $7,000 ice bath, whether it's supplements, whatever it is. And this is the problem with very clever people who have come from, who've perhaps got doctorates and what have you. They know people will trust what they say based on their title and who they are. They also know how to manipulate information and to isolate specific parts of studies that are out there that potentially disprove them, but they can pull out just enough that makes what they're saying sound accurate and compelling. And I think that's the challenge that we have, you and I, as nutritionists who are evidence-based, who do want to provide factual, non-biased information to people so that it makes it easier for an individual to identify the best approach for them, which again comes back to that individualism perspective. It makes it difficult for us because ultimately a lot of what we say sounds a lot less sexy than the zealots who are able to go make a really bold claim and go, yeah, this has been covered in this study and this study and this study, and people go, oh shit, must be true.
I get that, and it's interesting, and I mean, we all have our biases, right? And I have an obvious one, and I think one of the key watch outs, and I list 10 of them in the book, and I've also put them on my own social media, is how to spot someone who's likely quack. And one of them is, are they transparent about their financial biases, right? And you can only be transparent. We've all got them. I don't know if I can do a better job of telling people my role, but people still, some of the people who disagree with me, they still find a way of suggesting that I'm covering it up. No, I'm not. If ever I mention the H word, Huel, I always say it, and I've even now got my graphics guy putting a thing saying co-founder investor, pointing to me whenever I say the word, and I have to do it legally, because we're going to talk about the Stephen Bartlett thing, I'm sure. But also I've got it in my profile. I can't do it any clearer. But crucially, biases aren't always financially linked, and this is, and I actually think for many people, and this is why I have to check myself, and where I need people like you to hold me to account, actually, is I say I'm not doing any of my social media nutrition communicating stuff for money, right? I'm fortunate enough that I can do it without do that, but I have my biases because I'm trying to gain a following. But why am I trying to gain a following? Because I think I've got good information to give out. Who's to say I've got good information to give out? And you have to ask yourself these questions. And occasionally I've put out a couple of videos. Well, they've been true. Have I been truly intellectually honest with them? Because I have been doing them because I know they're the type that get the bigger followers. Okay, they're only things boring like 8 reasons to eat banana, which actually get quite good views. And but they're piss boring for me to create. But the reason I'm doing what I'm challenging myself there is I'm only doing it because I know they're the ones that get good engagement, so then I can push other content out. And I'd like to talk a little bit about our different styles, if you wouldn't mind, Paul, because your style
absolutely
is completely different. You've got that very, if I may say so, quite aggressive stance where you swear a lot. I mean, I don't mind it, but do you think it could be polarizing?
100%. And when I first started putting content out, most of my family, certainly my mum, were like, it's great what you're doing, but do you have to swear? And I'm like, well, I swear all the time in normal life. Like if I'm at the pub with my mates, I will say the word cunt about 20 times in 20 minutes. Like it's who I am. So I was like, I'm just being true to myself. And I think the direction that my content is taken it's actually been driven by my TikTok taking off, to be honest with you, because again, if I go back to before I was on TikTok, I called a few bits out. I not as much as I do, but as soon as my TikTok started to take off, where I did a couple of videos, my first viral video was having a pop at Slimming World and pointing out some of the key reasons why it's a really toxic environment and the information they share is nutritionally incorrect, to put it politely. And it gained me like 7,000 followers in the space of a weekend, and I was like, okay. And off the back of that, people started sending me videos going, can you do a video on this? Can you do a video on this? And it actually got driven by demand that I started doing more videos calling stuff out, and people liked it more when I was when I was saying that this product that is being labeled as fucking brilliant is actually shit, and these are the reasons for it. So it kind of got driven by the demand from that perspective. But I also I've copped a fair amount of comments from people where they're like that they didn't enjoy the content because of the swearing, and I'm like, cool, that's fine. If you can't take the underlying message from a video because it had the word fuck or cunt in it, like that's fine. This isn't the page for you. You're welcome to like please go and find another evidence-based creator like a Ben Carpenter who's not going to swear as much.
It's great. Ben's great.
Ben's awesome. I had a great time chatting with Ben in Ibiza last year at IFS. It was
I've not had the pleasure. No, we he was on the Men's Health podcast recently, and I was the next one, so we missed each other by a couple of days. But it's good. So on that, like I've got to know Dr. Riggs personally over the last sort of days, and we've become quite friends. And he's not as aggressive as you, but he's still quite aggressive in a different style to you, right?
Well, interestingly, I nearly came off of TikTok within 2 days of joining because of Dr. Rids, because I did a video where it was just me on lots of different cardio based equipment saying that it will do fuck all for fat loss if you're not in a calorie deficit. And he called out my video, to be fair.
Did he?
Said that so he said the information was correct but didn't like my delivery model. But he's got quite a lot of very aggressive followers. So for probably the better part of 2 weeks, I was getting hundreds of comments a day on all of my content from Dr. Id's followers telling me that I'm a twat and didn't know what I was talking about. So
How did that make you feel?
At the time, I was like, this is shit. I'm not doing this. I'm coming off. And then
did it sort of affect you? I'm really interested in learning this.
Yeah, so that because I was really new on TikTok at the time, and my Instagram has never really taken off in the same way.
It's weird, right? Because I'm the other way around.
Yeah, my Instagram is much slower. So I'd never really experienced any form of like negative feedback, and what I found very frustrating was that if you watched his Dr. Id's video, he didn't say what I said was wrong. He just said that he didn't appreciate the delivery method, which is fine because it was a slightly divisive video. It was tongue in cheek, but ultimately it rings true. You can do any of those cardio based activities and they won't cause fat loss on their own if you're not in a deficit. And that's how I chose to demonstrate it. So I did a response video. I sat down with a few people who are sort of close friends with, who have got good followings, who have had their fair share of sort of hate and stuff, and what I took from it is that actually every interaction is transactional on social media. The algorithm does not look at whether you're getting positive or negative comments. It looks at how much engagement a post is getting, and if it's getting a lot of engagement, it shows it to more people. And I thought, do you know what, actually there's an opportunity here that if I've got a few hundred people willing to spend hours a day telling me that I'm a dick in the comments, if I can go back proactively and semi-professionally to demonstrate why they're perhaps not correct, there's an opportunity for my post to do quite well. And actually it changed my perception in that now I quite welcome it when people start putting negative comments on my post, because I tend to look at it that I've got a live one, and if I can poke the bear for long enough, it will help boost that post engagement, and I can get something from it. So
good for you. Okay, good for you, mate. That's interesting to hear. Thank you for sharing that. It's a good perspective, because I've talked to some others, content makers with quite big followings recently. We were sort of talking about Dr. Id, and he can be quite polarizing in his style.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm doing a completely different thing, right? Sure, I'm associated with Huel, and maybe that's something, but I could still call people out. Dr. Karan, for instance, he calls people out, but does it quite passively. He'll put the video up and just talk about their point. But I'm not even going to go that far. I've only decided this recently, which is why I wanted to sort of ask you, because the few times I have had the negative comments, it does affect me mentally, because I'm doing this shit for free. That's what gets me. I genuinely, and people say, yeah, but you're promoting Huel. Well, maybe I am promoting Huel, but that's genuinely not my motivation. They might say, well, you're doing to promote your book. Do you know how little books sell these days? I mean, you probably do, right?
Yeah.
If you've got 4,000 copies, you've done extraordinarily well, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, my book's probably slightly different to yours because it's self-published for Amazon, so the numbers are even less. But I didn't put the book out with the intention of making a lot of money from it, on the basis that
you don't do it for that. Exactly. You do it for
self-publishing for Amazon. You get about £3 for each one that sells, if you're lucky. So it's
not much different if you've got a publisher, because you've got publisher, agent, you've got everyone's
taking all their cuts.
Yeah, which is fair enough, right? I mean, on the side note, HarperCollins, who I've worked with there, have been absolutely brilliant. I was warned with publishers, you don't get much support. I've had the opposite experience. They've been holding my hand all the way. I've had to literally say, look, guys, you don't need to come with me to this appointment. I'm a big boy. I can go on my own. Do you know what I mean? But it's great. And I can't, give them a shout out because it's genuine there.
No, excellent. I mean, if you can put them in touch with me, that'd be great.
Well, I'd have to go through an agent. But I'm happy to introduce you to my agent if you wanted, Paul. But you have to go through it.
Yeah, so it sounds ideal.
We'll take that offline. I don't want to bore all your audience here, but just on the start. So when if anyone's seen my comment or content, it's very different, right? You're on fat loss and exercise mainly, aren't you? And you call out people as well on misinformation. I'm not doing the call out misinformation now. I might call out a misinformation topic, but I won't necessarily. I have done it a couple of times, but I don't message the people now. I have gone on podcasts. I've spoken about Gary Brecker, and that came from the High Performance Podcast, because he'd been on, and Jake Humphrey asked me to mention. I'd gone on there saying you had some questionable people. I was all prepared for that, but I wasn't prepared for Jake to say, yeah, but who? And unfortunately, I had done my homework. So when I did say who, and Jake said, well, what? I had watched the episode recently, of Gary Becker, so I could pick out one thing that he'd said that was factually incorrect. So yeah, but I don't want to do the debunking thing. My style is to talk about anything. If people, I've got videos on where cravings come from. I've got things on the history of lunch and the history of breakfast. You know, a lot about food cultures from across the world. Obviously, tips like 8 reasons to have a banana, different nutrients. If it's food related, or nutrition related or health related, I'll talk about it, and that's because it helps me. It's just interesting content. The problem you've got an audience, Paul. You've got a very distinct audience who like your style. I don't have an audience, and that's I think in the short term, you know, me chasing followers, and even the very fact I have to say that word just demonstrates what's wrong with the world. But it's it's just very slow for me. LinkedIn is a different. Do you use LinkedIn much?
Not massively. Again, my background before getting into this space, I was in the corporate world selling technology to the NHS and public sector and stuff. So my LinkedIn is a lot more saturated with that kind of industry, and I've kind of stayed away from it. It's updated so that people can see what I'm doing, and I post on there every now and then, but it's not been a big space for me.
As long as you don't put your videos up with all your swearing, you could do well. I mean, for me, it's the bigger one for me. That's partly because I've got the business association, but you get fewer dicks on LinkedIn. They're still there. They lurk, and I've got my own little hate club. And you know, the anti-seed oilers and stuff like that. It's fewer, and it's generally more respectful because people are there in their work capacity. And I've got the biggest following on LinkedIn, Instagram being a second. It's interesting. Just on your Instagram, it hasn't really taken off for you. Do you put the same videos you put on your TikTok on your Instagram?
Yeah, I do. I took a bit of a hiatus from posting on Instagram probably about 18 months ago, because I just became a bit disillusioned with it. My TikTok was going mad and Instagram was not. So for a while I was about 8 months behind the content that was going on Instagram. But Instagram recently made a few changes to Reels, and any video that's over 3 minutes, although you can post it, they don't push it to new audiences.
Even 90 seconds they don't, unless you've got a big following. It's over 90 seconds.
Well, they upped it to 3 minutes for Reels, but anything, like really recently, within the last few weeks, and so they now don't push any long form video to new audiences. So a lot of my videos were just over the 3 minute mark. So I basically scrapped it. It's on a hard drive, and I'll
anything that's over 90 seconds for me does rubbish.
So I basically now everything that goes up on both platforms on the same day.
I do the same, but you've got a TikTok first mindset. I've got an Instagram first mindset. For me, it's an afterthought. TikTok, if I'm right, guessing you're the other way around, aren't you?
Yeah, a little bit. Like I said, now I'm trying to sort of forage down both at the same time, from that perspective. But yeah, it's a weird one. It's a weird one for social media. But so there's a point that I wanted to go back to. Actually, I think is a good opportunity.
I want to say on the misinformation influencers, if we can just come back at some point. But
it's along that line actually. In that, obviously, you went on the podcast with Jake, and you raised obviously concerns about previous guests that they had on. I think it leads really nicely into obviously the Diary of a CEO podcast. Obviously, Stephen is closely affiliated with Huel, is closely linked, big obviously investor, advocate, promoter. How do you feel with regards to the guests that he's had on the Diary of a CEO, and obviously the fact that there has been, I think it was the BBC expose, detailed like 14 or 15 different episodes within like a 3-month period of conflicting and potentially dangerous misinformation. How do you personally feel about that? And also, have you found that that's had a detrimental impact from a brand perspective when it comes to Huel?
I'm happy to talk about that. It's not the first time I've been asked this. The Guardian asked me, for instance, as did the Telegraph. Awful interview, by the way, with me in the Telegraph. I don't want. Why have I even said that now? Because now everyone's going to go Google it. The Guardian one's okay. Google that one. What did I say? Look, I'm concerned. Look, first and foremost, I'm a registered nutritionist. That is that's what, I'm proud of the title. I was one of the first in on the Association for Nutrition, showing my age again, and it's and that's essentially what I am. I try to be an evidence-based practitioner. I'm a former dietitian, so that is first and foremost. The Huel thing is because of that, right? So I feel I have to do a good job. Now, I've met Steve a few times. I've been out on a night out with him once, and this was all the early days of Dragon's Law, before the Dragon's Den thing. And he's a good guy. And he, so if people don't know, obviously he's known for Dragon's Den now, which is BBC, which is interesting. The BBC called him out, right? I thought that was interesting. But good, actually, a good thing. And so Steve is an investor in Huel. He was on our board, but a few weeks ago, you might have read the announcement, he came off. And that is, people are going to say, because of the letters, it's purely because he's too busy. He's got so much going on now. When he signed up was the end of 2020. I think that was it. Yeah. It was, he didn't have anything going on. He wasn't a dragon then. He was going to become a dragon, but he wasn't. So it's, I think I might have got the year. I might be under 2021. Apologies if I've misrepresented that. And we advertised on it as well, and we advertised early. We've stopped advertising, I think maybe more than a year now on there, and that's just because different arrangements for both businesses. But so Steve is now just an investor. He has some shareholding in Huel. That's his association. How do I feel personally about some of the guests? Well, you know the answer to that. I find a lot of the guests very questionable. He's had the Lane Nortons, the Giles Yoes of the world. He had my friend Professor Sarah Berry on recently. Excellent episode. I urge people. I've got to know Sarah personally, and she's brilliant. And I've noticed his team are now putting the caveats on. When they had someone on recently talking about negatively about fiber, they put a thing on the screen, but if you're on Spotify or Apple, you can't see.
You don't get the announcement. It doesn't do a little override.
Midway
through.
It's a step in the right direction. It proves this team are acknowledging it. But the people, and it's not just Steve, right? And this is what I tried. No. I tried to challenge Jake and Damien on the High Performance podcast on this, and I did have the advantage, by the way, in all transparency. I knew Jake beforehand, so I was first time I'd met Damien, but I've been at a wedding last summer with Jake, and when I basically got drunk and I went up to him and I said, I want to be on your podcast, mate. And so it kind of worked. So the barriers were down, but I still feel I should have done a bigger job on pushing them. And I did challenge them on what, how do they deal with having the questionable people on? And they sort of said, well, they've done the research and they feel that people are giving good information, which is a fair answer. My challenge back to everyone, and with the same challenge to Steve here, probably more so to Steve, is like, that's fine, and you're not a nutritionist, none of you are nutritionists, but you do have, I feel, if you're hearing conflicting information, you're clued up enough because you've had a variety of guests who give different information. You could ask questions in the right way that would challenge that perspective, or at least, I don't look. Maybe it's the wrong word, because I'm nutrition and to some degree sustainability is my bag, right? If I was interviewing someone on, say, cognitive psychology or anthropology, and they were saying something questionable, I would challenge. It doesn't even have to be questionable. I would try and answer the question the right way, to be open-minded about it, and to say, you're sure, where do you get the information of that from, and how do you know? Now, maybe I'm being unfair to the podcast host there, because even though I'm not a psychologist or an anthropologist, I still have that science way of thinking like you do. Do you know what I mean? To make and I think you need to. What the point I'm trying to make is, I'm just to try and round it off, and I don't know if I'm making it very well. I feel some podcasters could do a better job, and Joe Rogan's in this lump as well, of challenging, even if you don't have the skills in that area. And this is part of the problem.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point that I was gonna make as well. Like, I've called out a number of the episodes that Stephen has done and other podcasts have done with people that have been sharing inaccurate information. And again, it's my frustration comes from it that I think when you've got a massive audience and you're putting podcasts out and you're getting people on who've also got large audiences, I personally feel that there's a duty of care to ensure that the information is either accurate, or if it's inaccurate, is challenged. Get if somebody like a Gary Brecker is making a claim that sounds questionable or even just conflicts what a previous guest has said, ask them about it. Get them to go into more detail. Where does this information come from? Can you back it up?
Yeah.
Because you don't need to understand the subject in depth to be able to ask probing questions. I think the challenge that I've had with a lot of the podcasts that get the same old faces on is that they give people a platform to share potentially misinformation with no challenge. They almost elevate it and go, oh yeah, that's brilliant, what great information, I didn't know that, that's fantastic. And that's the risk factor, because people will look at Stephen and his podcast with a great deal of respect because of the size of his following and his social stature. And
it's also like, because they've got a big following, that more people are listening to that episode, and so you've just got the content numbers. There's a couple of things there, Paul. I agree, of course. This is boring, isn't it? We're agreeing on everything so far. We're going to get there in the elephant in the room in a minute. But I've been on a couple of sort of smaller podcasts recently, and I've had the hosts, and I'm fortunately I've done so many, they're not going to guess who I'm talking about here. But lovely people, and I've said what I've said, and they've just gone, yes, oh yeah. Then I've listened to other episodes where I've had people in, say, the Anti-Seed-All Brigade on there, and they've just done exactly the same. And that isn't good. It's not good. And on the High Performance podcast is interesting, right? Because the Gary Brecker episode was about a year before me, I think. And you look at, if anyone goes on there and just looks at the numbers, it's huge with him on there. My numbers are really poor. I'm not going to, that could be because I'm an unknown face. It's only been the last year I've put my head, or even 6 months, put my head above this virtual parapet and started saying, hey everybody, I'm here talking about it. But everybody who's criticized my content on that one or any of the other podcasts I've been on, obviously it's been a lot more on that one because of the numbers, but every criticism I've had has been of the more zealot style. Literally, I've had no high rung critique, and that's disappointing because I'm not right on everything. I know I'm not. How arrogant would I be to know that everything I've said there? Or maybe it's because, and this is where I want people like you to hold me to account, and to, if you ever see me doing this, Paul, you've got my number now. You need to send me a message, James. I don't think you did a good job there, because I will respect that. I try and talk in this nuanced, non-committal way, and this, we're talking about watch outs and how people discern who's good information and who's not. The key underlying one that everyone can follow, and this translates to all sciences, all science communicators, is, are they very non-committal? Do they talk with a lot of nuance? And I think that's a quality. People want these absolute thinking, and they want to know answers. And unfortunately, the world just doesn't work like that. I think the best type of communicator, and I know you like Lane Norton as well, and Mike Israetel, I've not heard you talk about him, but I assume he's in your camp of someone you respect, right? That they're confidently unconfident. And I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at it, because they're confident with being unconfident. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I watch a lot of people, even like yourself. That sounded patronizing, even like yourself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. I mean, even like you. No, I apologize. But I mean, like yourself, who are looking at different styles, because can I do better? Can I be better at being a communicator? If I'm going to go out there into the wide world, which I plan on doing, and debate the likes of Gary Brecker, I need to be, the one thing he is absolutely outstanding at is as a communicator. He
100%.
He is a brilliant, and so is Glucose Goddess, and their Media Boo is a different thing. We'll talk about it in a minute. But it's I need to be as good as them, and I'm going to be having some formal top level training to be as good as a presenter as they are, because if we need to tackle the misinformation, we need to be able to do it. But I'm not going to be a debunker like you are, but I would, and I'm saying this before, I will debate anybody in front of an audience, and I mean anybody. I'd probably be it's probably the wrong thing to do with the Eddie Aboos of the world. I don't think it would be the wrong thing to do with the Gary Breckers of the world, because I'm confident enough that if I don't know what I'm talking about, to say I don't know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, and again, I think to come back to a point that you made in terms of, for those listening, if you want to be able to identify very easily who might be a more credible source of information, it's those who talk in absolutes. Evidence-based providers of content never speak in absolutes.
Yeah,
and Lane Norton is a great example of that. He says frequently that exact point, that you'll never catch him talking in absolutes, because you never can. You can only ever base and formulate your opinion on the evidence and data that we have to hand. And if you go back over the history of time, science is forever proving itself wrong. What we believed 100 years ago on a number of subjects is now no longer what we believe now, because we have new evidence. And when new evidence presents itself, you analyze it, you delve into it, and you determine whether or not it's credible. And if it is, that then becomes part of what you formulate your opinion on the subject of.
That's Bayesian reasoning. That's a Bayesian mindset, and that's the way to, back to first principles, and then look at, build it up from there. Reassessing your prior and change your mind.
Yeah,
that's okay. To change your mind.
100%. And again, a great example of it is, you often get people try and claim, things like, calories in versus calories out isn't true for fat loss. And you go, well, actually, it was first theorized, I think, in 1850. I think the law of thermodynamics was first theorized, sort of confirmed 1851, I think it was, something like that. And it's yet to have been disproven. And we've got, particularly in the last 10 years, the amount of studies that have been conducted on health, nutrition, fat loss, weight gain, everything. And we've got this massive amount of information on all of the wider factors that contribute to weight loss and weight gain as well. Environmental factors, social factors, all these things. But ultimately, when it all boils down to it, fat gain and fat loss is the result of an either energy deficit or surplus. And that's yet to be disproven. And this is the beauty of when people go, that's old hat. And you go, well, actually, it's not, because
it's nuanced in itself, right? Yeah. I think that equation is fundamental. It's the first law of thermodynamics, and like you say, and what affects that's a different conversation.
Yeah,
broadly speaking, it is. We can, as a side note, with calorie counting as a strategy, we might have a slightly different opinion on there, but we ain't going to disagree on the laws of physics, because we'd be just stupid. We'd be these people. Well, one of us would be the people that we're talking about. But just before we maybe move on to calories, I just want to round up something about the different sort of archetypes. And I think it's a minor point, but to me, I think sometimes it's always important to be clear, because we've got the different, we spoke about the Gary Breckers, who's got science background. Maybe you could put Glucose Goddess in the same sort of bracket as Brecker. The Eddie Aboos of the world, he is a complete zealot. He ignores science, and he's not even a good communicator, but he's just compelling in the way he does. And I find that quite interesting. But you've also, in your other content, is put Tim Spector in that same bracket.
Yeah,
I don't agree. Now, while he's put some really questionable content out there, right? His thing on the calories, talking about some supplements and stuff like that I find so disappointing. And the whole, I don't know if anyone's read any of my work, or you've read any work on the whole ultra processed food debate, but that's one that I'm got my head around big time, right? And I met Tim briefly at a conference, enough to say hello, and I asked him an uncomfortable question, and I got an uncomfortable answer. I thought, what do you think of Huel? And he said, I don't like it. And then I thought, I'm not going to be a dick here. He's just come off stage, and we're having the coffees after, first time I meet you to start. I'm just not going to be that dick. But I'm one, I know lots of people like Sarah Berry, for instance, who are friends with him. And some of the research that Tim Spector has done is outstanding. And his resume, I think it's unfair to put him in the same bracket as that, as the Breckers and the Aboos of the world, right? But I get it why people are doing it, because he's going on there, and him and Chris Van Tulloch are partly responsible for putting the negative perception of ultra processed foods out there in the way they have, because they're highly credible academics, and they've gone on highly credible podcasts like Diary of a CEO, and they've caused this confusion on the ultra processed food debate, which is something like I said, I've covered a lot. We may or may not want to talk about it now, but so yes, I am very disappointed. I'm so much more disappointed with the Tim Spectors of the world than I am with the others because of that reason. But I just think it's unfair to put them in the same bracket.
Yeah, and I think actually there's a sliding scale from that perspective, because not everything that Tim Spector says is inaccurate, can be classed as misinformation. There's a lot of information that he puts out that is very, very accurate, because ultimately it's who he is. And probably the same with Gary Brecker. What zealots do zealots are probably the worst. They're the ones that have no fucking clue. They're Eddie Abuse. They have no clue what they're talking about. The perhaps the slightly more charlatan people out there are the ones who they sprinkle enough truth through the misinformation to keep it compelling. The likes of Gary Brecker. Whereas I don't think Tim Spector is a person who does that, who sprinkles enough truth to get away with presenting misinformation. I think ultimately, when you are a more scientific minded person, you do challenge things, and you will make statements, and you will put theories out there that maybe question belief systems and evidence that we have at the moment. And I think perhaps from Tim's perspective, there's probably been a slight crossover from a theorizing certain things, and maybe because of social media, it is everything is exaggerated, it is a caricature of real life. That theorization has come across more as a statement of fact.
I think what you've got there is some of his biases heavily kicked in and stuck in position. And at this very conference I was talking about, they were talking about ultra processed foods up there, and he was sitting next to this professor from Northern Ireland who was probably in line with my way of thinking, and it Tim wouldn't budge on the issue, and that's what I find, so his core content is very questionable, a lot of his, but he's done so much for scientific research. I think that needs to be noted, and which is why I would feel disappointed. But I get it, though. I get why people do.
The only caveat I would say to that is sometimes there are people who've built up a very excellent level of trust and have done fantastic work in the past, who then pivot off of their elevated standing and trust to then push an agenda. And I think sometimes going back to the very first point that you raised in terms of we should hold each other accountable when information is inaccurately put out, I think it's an example of that. Just because somebody has done a lot of good work in the past, if they are then presenting misinformation and ultimately chatting shit, that their good work isn't justification for that. They should still be sort of held to a decent level of accountability on that perspective. And I think it's why I've probably grouped Tim Spector into the same group. He's not as bad as a lot of the others by any stretch, but again, you
could argue you should hold him to a higher account. The point that I made at the beginning of our interview, right? Yeah, good, fair point. Because he's done all the good stuff, and and his stuff work on the microbiome is amazing, right? And it's you maybe should hold him to a higher account. It's the same bracket bit I'm coming to. That's my point. Yeah,
it'd probably sit in a slightly different bracket on the basis not the worst one out there at the end of the day. But I think again it's a very interesting point from that perspective. And I think whilst we're on the subject of what do we do when we've got differing opinions and stuff, I think let's dig into the Huel side of things. A great opportunity, because I've always maintained, and again you'll find it in my content and in our first message exchange, I highlighted the fact that there is a time and a place for everything. Meal replacement shakes 100% do have a place in the, for example, if you're a really busy person, really, and I was a good example of this in my corporate world, because I was traveling all the time in the car up and down the motorway, stopping at services and stuff. And do you know what? Sometimes it's just easier if you want to feel like you're getting something with a bit more nutritional value than a Subway or whatever's available. Having something that you can just grab and go is obviously going to be of benefit from that perspective, because you do guarantee a better level of nutrient quality. You do guarantee a better ability to manage calorie intake, particularly if your goals are around fat loss, for example. So I think there is a time and a place for for the meal replacement type product. I think my early issues with Huel stemmed more from the fact that there were companies out there like your Herbalife, your Slim Fast, your Isogenics that I think were doing a fucking terrible job of damaging relationships with food and encouraging people to essentially not eat and just drink your calories instead, which I think was, and again, the focus from those products wasn't a health and a nutritional standpoint. It was more of a fat loss standpoint. So a lot of people foraged down a path of thinking that the only way they could lose weight was adopting these shakes. And then when they find that, you know, it's not really realistic to have 2 shakes a day and a 400-calorie meal in the evening, that, you know, they go back to what they're doing before and it all goes back on. And I think it does more harm than good. I think the reason why I initially started to sort of group Huel into that was, I think it more stems from some of the marketing side of things and some of the messaging that I've seen in the past. I think there was a time, again, this is going back a couple of years, on the Huel website. I think the strap line on the front, it was along the lines of the future of human nutrition. I don't know if it was those words specifically, but it implied that, you know, perhaps not meal replacement shakes, but, you know, sort of shakes and more convenient foods was kind of the way forwards, which, again, from a marketing perspective, people in marketing are paid to come up with catchy slogans to make money, let's be honest, from that perspective. But I thought that there was a potential discourse there that could have a negative knock-on effect to relationships with food. But I also find that some of the marketing that I've seen in terms of the comparisons, it's often, you know, if you're busy and your only options for lunch are McDonald's or Huel, and I sometimes find that it oversimplifies the choices that people have, in terms of, if you're not having this one product, your only other option is fast food, ultra processed. This is really bad, quite expensive. This is your only other option, which, again, those elements I find a little bit sort of disingenuous and a little bit misleading. And again, I'm acutely aware that that's probably not a perfectly true representation of actually the mission statement, the brand focus and the intention of what Huel is, and maybe a byproduct of actually the accelerated success, the fact that it has taken off over, you know, a period of a relatively short period of time. It's become a massive brand. It's involved in so many things. I think sometimes the underlying vision for what the product is can sometimes get lost in the in the corporate machine and the marketing side of things. So that, I think, for me, my issue is not with like Huel specifically. I don't think that the products are inherently bad and people shouldn't ever use them. My viewpoint is more a case of, because I like to help people to understand the basic principles and find a way that works best for them, sometimes these slightly, it's either this or this type messaging can be, I guess, slightly misleading from that perspective.
Oh, there's lots to come back on there, Paul.
Yeah.
Right. Great. Thank you for clarifying your perspective. The video that caused me was the Stephen Bartlett one, right? And you mentioned Huel, you know, his investment in Huel there, and you said the quote of I think my get slightly wrong, was like, causes disordered eating or promotes disordered eating or something like that. Was that correct? That's where you come from.
Words to that effect.
It was about, yeah, okay. And I did actually listen to it this morning just to remember, and I've still forgotten what your exact wording was. But it's I want to know, what you're an evidence-based practitioner. What's your evidence to back that up?
Yeah, good question. So again, a lot of it would be, and I know from an evidence-based perspective, this probably isn't the greatest standpoint, but again, like we said, the best thing to do is always to be honest from a situation. You know, when questioned, it's probably more anecdotal. It's probably more looking at things from a collective viewpoint in terms of correlations rather than necessarily causation. So I'm not saying if you use Huel, for example, that you will develop disordered eating. It may have come across in that manner, but I do think that the promotion of replacing actual food with meal replacement type products can lead to disordered eating behaviors. It can create fear of eating actual food. It can create an unhealthy dependency on utilizing those products. Now, again, to caveat it in the interest of being fairness, because as much as I can be a bit of a cunt, I'm not a cunt. Again, this isn't me saying that that's exclusive, because that can happen with any diet. Any dietary approach that you take can have the potential to encourage disordered eating behaviors. I just know that from a again, an anecdotal perspective from clients that I've worked with in the past, and conversations I've had from people who have used other meal replacement products, in particular, the likes of your Slim Fast, your Herbal Lives, that a lot of what I've been told firsthand from people is that it really did affect their relationship with food. They became scared to reintroduce more food, and that was what was meant by that statement.
There's a few things. Firstly, you keep using the term meal replacement. So do everyone else. Show me one place where Huel as a business has used the term meal replacement. Nobody can. We don't. The term, the category that we and our competitors are in is complete foods. That's the category. But nobody uses that. Of course, I get it. So we'll use it in response, but we won't use it. And this comes up a lot. Now, that's the problem. When we're not the meal replacement, right? I'm going to say, Paul, what are you having for dinner tonight, right? Would you say, oh, I'm not sure. I'm either going to have pizza or I'm going to replace it with some fish and chips? You would say, I'm going to have pizza or fish and chips, or well, you probably wouldn't say the last one. But it's a food. It's complete food. Now we have the different formats, and I don't want to plug the business too much here, but with the original was the powder. We've got the ready to drinks that people see in the stores and most familiar with, although it wasn't original products. We've got the hot and savoury, which are either grain-based, pasta-based, or noodle-based. Some of the more recent ones are in the pots, but you have the principle's the same. You add hot water, stir, leave for 5 minutes, and enjoy with a spoon. More closer to food. We've also got the bars. More recently, we've got what I'm drinking, obviously the Daily A to Z. That wouldn't be the complete food. That's a fortified drink. There's no two ways about it. But our core products are food, just in powder, liquid, or traditional form. Now, are they conventional food? Probably not, but we're going to, in the way people think of that. But then, so is a lot of what we eat these days, and we can go. There's a sliding scale here. We can go back to hybridization of plants if we want. We can go that far back, and I'm just, the crux of the book is complexity in the food system, but how individuals could do to address that. So we have to look at the totality of everything here. Now, I'll come back onto that point. Actually, I need to just sort of more cover your points of individuals first. So I think accepting that we're not a meal replacement, I hate the term.
Yeah, this for me is really interesting, because again, as I said, I think part of it could be lost in translation due to when a business becomes larger, marketing becomes even more important, and obviously selling units and the success of the business, maybe certain messages do get muddied in the water a little bit. And I think that's probably what has happened, because again, just to get some more splinters in my arse and sit on the fence a bit more, again, I've never seen Huel position themselves as a weight loss product, whereas other meal replacement shakes 100% do position themselves as that, which has always been a reason.
Thing, there are competitors. I won't name the German company; it's a big competitor of ours, because I don't want to give them any airtime. But they would be in the same category as us, right? And I get that, and I don't have to have the same problem. But it's we're not that. I come from I did my dietetics degree in the 90s, right? And some of the things you mentioned were quite rife in that time, and we were constantly looking at them. I was going on study days talking about them. I get the concerns, and they work for some people, and the VLCDs, very low calorie diets, and everything like that. That it's different. But also, meal replacement is actually linked to the diet side of things. So we actually can't call ourselves that, because we're not low calorie, we're not high calorie. Huel is medium calorie, for want of a better term. Go to the hospital sit feeds, they're like 1.25 to 1.5 calories per mil. The weight loss stuff are more like 0.5 calories per mil. All your products, the liquid or the powders, when made up as per instructions, are 0.8 calories per mil. So we're just providing nutrition now.
So on that point, can I just raise one other question that I've always had, because I've always had a bit of a bugbear with the phrase nutritionally complete.
Okay.
On the basis that obviously everybody's requirements from a nutrient basis will vary based on a number of factors: age, height, weight, gender, activity, all that kind of stuff. So I always find it, I guess, frustrating when brands use phrases like "it's a nutritionally complete meal." There's also the slight caveat, which goes back to what we were discussing right at the start, in terms of obviously you then have to look at the bioavailability of plant-based protein versus animal-based protein, and amino acids and all that stuff. And I don't want to go into like loads of detail about it, but what, from your perspective, because obviously on a nutrition standpoint, you're way more qualified than I am on the subject. So I guess the clarification that I would like is, nutritionally complete to me, I think, is marketing bullshit used by the likes of Herbalife and stuff to justify.
I don't know if they can say that. Yeah.
I know they definitely have.
Let me give you the term was only undefined legally until Huel came up. We got challenged by the ASA back in the earlier days, and we put in our counterclaim, and they accepted our claim, and now the term has a formal definition, partly on the back of what we we'll make it all sound like me here, but what we stated. The term now, it's let me just explain what that is. And there's a short article on the website that if people just call Huel nutritionally complete, they can find the description. But it meets all essential nutrients at a certain level, with according to the recommended daily amounts of the region in which it's sold. But if there's evidence to say that the actual requirement's higher, let's say, because vitamin D hasn't been updated since the research is updated, then they were taking that into account. If you've alluded to the fact some of the plant, there's anti-nutrients. These, for people who don't know what anti-nutrient is, it's something that has a nutritional benefit or a health benefit itself, but also maybe stops the absorption or bioavailability of another nutrient in doing so. So phytic acid is the glaring example here, where it limits the absorption of iron. So to counter that, we've got things like extra vitamin C in it, because that promotes iron absorption. So we factored all these things in. So we know on a pro rata basis, and that's key, that people will be getting suitable of all essential nutrients and optimal levels of some, but also limiting the ones that people don't want so much of, like saturates, sugar, salt. Now we do that modeling based on a 2,000 per calorie a day basis, because that's the average. That's what all the recommended daily amounts are based on. Okay. And we have run trials, by the way, on people having 100% Huel at 2,000 calories. But they're trials. I would never encourage anybody to do that. Can you? If people want to do it without powders, I'd say, yeah, go ahead. If your diet's poor, it'd be great. And I know people that have done it for long term voluntarily. When I've heard of them, I've had calls with them because I want to chat with them how they felt about it, because I couldn't do it. I'm to be honest with you there. But and if so, just to sort of so that's nutritionally complete, broadly speaking. There's also things like phytonutrients. But most of the ingredients of Huel are natural. They're with milled oats, milled flaxseed. So there's naturally occurring phytonutrients. We've added things like lutein in it as well, which is an antioxidant. It's a carotenoid. It's also associated with slowing down macular degeneration. We can't back that up as a claim, because it's not a legal claim, but there is good research that a good lutein intake is associated with eye health as you grow older. So that's it. But we don't expect people to have 100% Huel, and who's Huel for? Well, Huel is, we have people that have 1 or 2 meals a day of Huel. Great. We have the 100%, the very, very few people have 100% Huel. We have people, you mentioned when you're in your former job, you're out and about on the road, maybe they're salespeople on the road, and just they only go out maybe 2 days a week. The rest of it, they're doing phone calls and office. And on those 2 days out, maybe they want 1 Huel meal a day. And that's great. We've got other people who are fortunate, and this is the key word, very, very privileged. Money is not an issue for them. They can prepare their own food, and they've also had the skills to prepare their own food. We've got to remember there's a lot of people that are, maybe second generation, have not been taught the basic cooking skills, and they're going for otherwise poor food choices. We've got and people that aren't privileged enough to be able to eat meals with other people, and I talk a lot about this in the book, and we won't have time, but maybe that's a conversation for another time. But the importance of sharing meals is there's so many direct biological effects from the sharing aspect, not just the nutrient, the food itself. But people aren't privileged to do this, because they might not be privileged by time. They could be quite affluent, but they're busy people. Maybe they're in broken family. We have to acknowledge this. And there's so many different circumstances. Like, how many people do you know have the opportunity to share 3 meals a day with their family that's home prepared? And they've also, not only that, they bought the foods sort of ethically and sustainably. And meat debate out the way here, it can have meat, or I say sustainably, relatively comparative to other food choices. How many people do you know on that? I can't think of anybody I know. So now let's fast forward back in the real world. Okay, we've moved forward since those days, and I like to Actually, I'll come back to that. We've moved forward. We've got 8.1 billion people and rising on this planet. Okay. Now we've got a rising incidence of non-communicable disease, something you talk about a lot. We've got questionable sustainable practices. We've got questionable ethical practices, right? We know the food related carbon emissions are possibly between 25 and 30% as from the food system, right? And you know, there's one thing we can do. One thing, people can, you know, might not afford electric cars, and there's questions whether they're better anyway, and there's other, you know, we're a consumer-based society. We like to buy things. We don't. The circular economy is gone. You know, when I was growing up, we were darning socks. Right now,
Yeah.
you know, 3 pairs for £1. Of course, you're not going to darn your socks. It's not a good use of your time. So, but one thing everyone can do is change the way they eat. They can eat more sustainably. They can cut down their animal-derived ingredients. Not cut them out. I don't. Like we discussed at the beginning of the podcast, they can improve their carbon footprint by making better food choices. Now, Huel addresses the convenience point. They're high in fibre. We're in a fibre crisis. According to the British Nutrition Foundation, from 2021 stats, only 9% of adults in the UK are having enough fibre. Only 9%.
Mad, isn't it?
And in America, it's probably even more. They actually have, I think we're about 30 grams a day of fibre in the UK. The US recommendation is 28%, and only 5% of them are getting it. Right, so by eating more plant-based, you're addressing that problem as well. It's good for your own health, which is why when we were talking about the carnivore earlier, we were agreeing on that point. Why the biggest issue I have is not the amount of meat they're having; it's what they're not having because they're having the meat. And
100%. Yeah, if you mass elimination of anything is going to be ultimately detrimental to overall health.
Yes, and we need convenience food because because we've moved forward, technology's moved forward. We don't have to do the food. Now our ancestors, we only have to go back 3 or 4 generations, maybe, that we were at least involved in the food production for our own household to some degree, whether that be in the agriculture part or the preparing part. Things have moved on. We're not doing that anymore. It'd be very nice in one respect to go that, but it's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
Here's where I like to quote the environmentalist Mark Linus here, and I don't know whether it's absolutely true, but he says, if we were to go back to natural farming methods circa 1960, we would need a plot the size of 2 South Americas in order to feed the planet. Now, I can't quantify that, but it certainly seems intuitively true. And he's talking about it from a sustainability angle. He's also talking about the growing population, and it just wouldn't be convenient. And the best thing people can do, this is your wheelhouse, is to be more sustainable in their eating, is just to eat less. Right, and we're such an affluent society that we're throwing the bulk of what we have away. And we can talk about ethics here and what's questionably ethical. One thing I tell you that I think most people would agree on me on, it's one thing buying intensively farmed red meat and eating it, right? It's another thing to buy it and just not to eat it, just to throw it away. That to me is very morally questionable, because we're that wealthy, we're that affluent in society that we can slaughter an animal and just throw it away without even consuming its carcass, its nutrition-rich carcass. That gets me. And I know people aren't looking at it from an ethical perspective. I don't want to they're just not thinking. They see it as a commodity. I mean, it's something they bought. They can throw it away. It's okay. It's discarding. We're also told not to eat too much. So maybe it's a good thing that people are throwing it away. And there's got a subsection of the book, I'll call it waste or waste, as in waste or waste.
Yeah.
What do you do with it? So I'm just throwing some points there. So what's my point with Huel? How do I bring this back? My little rant that I've gone on for a moment. How do I bring it back to Huel? Well, Huel is, for most people, it's the best plan B, right? We don't say it's the plan A. Nowhere do we say this is perfect. If you're someone that prepare all those meals, Huel is absolutely not for you. I would be discouraging you from having Huel. But that's the real world, right? People are making otherwise bad food choices that are bad for their health, bad for the environment. We offer a solution. Where do I see Huel in the future? I do lectures on the future food systems. That's something else I'm doing, because that's broadly speaking what the book's about. And I have this image at the end, and maybe rather arrogantly, I've got a load of cogs in the wheel. I'm looking at different technologies like the cellular agriculture, regenerative agriculture, some insect farming, novel proteins and novel fats and algae and things like that, ultra processed foods on there, intensive farming's on there. I've kind of got relative sizes of where I think, and it's all conjecture. I don't put evidence there. I've got one tiny little cog there with Huel written on it, right? I see Huel and maybe the complete food space as one small cog for the future of how we can address the problems with the food system. And that's where I see Huel fitting in. Is it for everybody? No. Is it a solution and helpful for some people? Absolutely. Obviously I'm biased, but I get people daily, tens of people daily messaging me about how Huel is helpful. Of course, most of it's on LinkedIn. It's a bit of a circle jerk on LinkedIn. I get it, right? But it's, it does happen, and I don't think these people are lying. And so I'm not, Huel isn't for some people. That's okay. But has it and it's not the same thing as the other companies you've mentioned. It is in a similar space to some of our competitors for sure. So did I get slightly annoyed when I saw your post? Because I watched it because you called out the Stephen Bartlett the podcast thing, and I was on a mission of looking at some of that content, and then I thought, this guy's I was more disappointed with what I heard from you than I was from the Eddie Boos and Tonics Health of the world, because I don't want to sound patronizing. Well, actually, this isn't patronizing, the opposite of patronizing. I expect more from you. Yeah. And I hope that comes across the right way, Paul. But I get it. It might just be, and please correct me, I don't want to pretend to know your position here, but you just probably you hadn't thought it through enough, and you saw we call out calories. You'd looked at some of our marketing claims that you didn't sit well with you, and you just thought, well, okay, this is you're a human nutritionist, right? You think of the individual when the people you coach and stuff. It's the individual. You're not thinking about the environment. Fair? Yeah,
completely fair.
Yeah, and so you were thinking, well, I want these people preparing food. Well, yeah, I think you should. You should be doing that, and maybe at the end of this, if I can have you with the mindset of going away thinking I'm going to carry on doing exactly what I'm doing, but if I've got some some client out there who occasionally is on the road, I might suggest that Huel is an option that he can have in the back of his mind if he or she not very woke with me there, wasn't isn't it hasn't got time. That would be a good win, because that's where I'm coming from there.
And to be fair, on that point, I have said a number of times to clients previously that and I said at the start of my piece, there is a time and a place for it. I've got no issues when it's used appropriately for what it is intended. I just my personal perception of it is, perhaps again from a marketing perspective, is that maybe it leans into other markets a little bit, and perhaps that slightly muddies the waters on where it is. So
it does lean into those markets, but it leans into tens of other markets as well, right? It's multiple products, it's multiple use product.
The two questions I have got from that side of things, I'll ask them sort of as a double barrel, but they're slightly separate. So the first one obviously comes back to the debate around processed and ultra processed foods, and obviously where you feel Huel fits within that, because technically speaking, obviously it could be considered an ultra processed food, or at least a processed food. So it'd be interesting just to get your thoughts on that perspective, because that is a big buzz at the moment. And then I guess the final question on the Huel factor from my perspective is just if you personally feel that the brand image, the representation of Huel is a fair reflection of what Huel is, because from what you've said, I completely echo, and I do actually agree on a lot of the points that you raised, and that there is a time and a place for products like Huel, and I can completely see the standpoint and the benefits of it. I just feel that perhaps the representation from a marketing perspective doesn't always echo that. So I'd love to know from your perspective, do you feel that the current brand image and perception of Huel is reflective of the core values and the vision?
Let me answer that. The ultra processed food is a big one of mine, right? And I've probably got hard out in 10 minutes, right? So I don't know if I'm going to cover that one well enough, but let me address that second point first. I think that's the important one to relate to what we're talking about. People obviously have different perceptions of what they see from the marketing. Our marketing's quite broad. We target a lot of different people. So busy people, sports people, different age demographics, different gender demographics. So our marketing, perhaps what you've seen is you've taken a bit that doesn't sit well maybe doesn't sit so well with you.
Mm.
I think because we're so broad, yes, it does represent the brand because it's broad. We're an alternative. But our target is for every adult. A potential target is every adult, unless there's some nutritional reason why they wouldn't have it. But broadly speaking, so it represents the brand as in that's what we're trying to achieve. We're available as an option for people. Going to the ultra processed food bit, here's the debate. Okay, I'm betting, Paul, 5 years ago, maybe slightly different because you're a nutritionist, but I'm betting you hadn't heard the term ultra processed food. If you had, you'd probably heard it casually, and you hadn't did very well. Yeah, I'm pretty certain if I was talking to a non-nutritionist here, they'd say I hadn't heard of it. Okay, now I bet you hear it 5 or 6 times a day. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you probably more, but
it's public enemy number one at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's public enemy. Yet every academic and nutritionist dietitian that I know accepts the fact that it has no firm definition. Now, hopefully most of your listeners know where it comes from. The University of Sao Paulo, Carlos Montenegro, 2009, first paper in 2011, the NOVA categorization, the 4 groups. This is NOVA 4, right? A bunch of people have come up in good faith with what they saw as a definition, except it doesn't have a definition. Because now there's some brilliant work done by the recently late Michael Gibney, who traced in different research papers how ultra processed food NOVA 4 category was defined over the years, and it was different in every paper. Yeah, now, that's interesting. So we've all gone on about how much we rate good faith academics and dietitians, nutritionists, nutrition communicators here. I'm now going to criticize them, and including a lot of these are personal friends. They will agree with me saying that the phrase lacks a firm definition, yet they will go on in the next sentence and use the term ultra processed food.
Yeah,
I don't like to use terms that I don't know the definition of. This is where it falls down. Now, in ultra processed people, Chris Van Tulleken, an excellent book, by the way. I just disagree with him on quite a lot, but a very well written book, and the last quarter of it was outstanding when he's talking about the food system. I don't disagree with anything on the last quarter of it. Have you read the book, by the way?
I haven't. No.
It's well written. I just profoundly disagree with the earlier parts of it. And interestingly, the later parts of it, in where he says we should on food policy, I think he's spot on. But he will say the beauty in the term is they've tried to come up with a definition, and previous terms like junk food lack a definition. Look, this is one of those moments where I like to be one of those smart nutritionists and pretend I know a lot about philosophy as well. And I'll quote Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the philosophers of the 20th century, and he says the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And the point I'm trying to make there is sometimes it's the nuance, it's the impreciseness of language that makes it work. I think the term junk food is better. Why do I think it's better? It was first used in the 1950s. It became in common usage in the 1970s. Yes, I am nerdy enough to go back and trace this. And there's a kind of playfulness in the term junk food. Right? We know it's not perfect food. We know to have good food. When you use the term ultra processed food, it confuses us. We don't know what's good or bad. Now, does Huel come under this NOVA 4 definition? Well, yeah, according to them, but it's just a definition that a bunch of people have come up with, all in good faith. And I'm not opposed to the term ultra processed food. I think it has a place, but it should stay in academia, or should have stayed in academia. When you're looking at disease patterns and how things like meat-rich diets relate to non-communicable disease risk, or plant-based rich diets and disease risk, or Mediterranean diet and disease risk, or diets high in so-called ultra-processed foods and disease risk, I think it's useful for spotting in epidemiology for looking at disease patterns. But the problem is it's all lumped in one. And I was talking to a high-profile nutrition communicator last year. I had the good fortune of having coffee with him, someone who's trying to change the policy at government level at the moment. And he agreed with me, but he said to me, James, yeah, but there'll always be victims, like meaning companies like Huel that fall at the margins of this and will get lumped in there. And he said, that's just a shame. And I wasn't quick enough. As I was driving home, I thought, no, I won't name him. You're wrong, because everyone listening to this will have heard of him. I thought, you're wrong on this. The victims will be the consumers who are getting confused by the misinformation. What I'm angry about is the people like Tim Spector and Chris Van Tulleken, who I think, like I've said, I think they're in many respects good faith communicators, but they've gone out there into the wide world on high-profile podcasts like the Diary of a CEO. They've used the term ultra-processed food. All they've done is cause confusion, because then you've got the Eddie Aboos and Tonic Healths of the world picking up on the term and using it, misrepresenting it. Oh, it's got more than 4 ingredients, therefore it's shit. Like I said before, we've got sustainability issues. The world has moved on, right?
Yeah.
We can't go back to those times. We have to, products that are so-called ultra-processed food are going to be part of the solution. However, I accept that, broadly speaking, probably guessing here, 80% of the foods, of the ultra-processed foods we eat, are junk food, high fat, high sugar, high salt, fiber foods that we should, so we should be doing better. The food industry should be doing a better job using the massive food scientific skills that we have. We know so much about how to change food for its qualities, and including organoleptic qualities here, not just nutritional qualities. We can do a better job. Has the food industry as a whole, this big food, has it not done a good job? Absolutely, it's not done a good job. It's done a very, very poor job. But does it have the tools necessary to do a better job? It absolutely has them ready and waiting. And this is why I think like the cellular agriculture space, the precision fermentation space, is really, really interesting. And that's just going to cause so much of nutrition populists to rally against it. But I've got no financial stake in these companies at all, other than I know some of the people that are working in the space. But I'm shouting for them on the sidelines here, because this is how we're going to solve the problems. But going back to these old farming techniques and eating real food, whatever that term means, is just not, it's just done.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. And I think that's a really valuable insight, and it raises a really good point. The phrase ultra processed food doesn't actually tell us anything about the nutrient quality of the food. It's just, again, typically, as you said, anything over a certain number of ingredients is considered processed or ultra processed. Well, you can have foods that fall into that category that are still packed full of nutrient quality. It doesn't mean just because they've gone through a process that they are now inherently bad. And I think, as a good place to kind of round things off, and a good sort of final thought, I think if people start to view both their food, their activity in more health-centric manners, i.e. from their food perspective, look at it from a more health-centric perspective. Don't look at it purely from a weight loss perspective or anything. Aim to get good varieties to the food you're eating, the right balance of vitamins and minerals, include some of the food that you enjoy, and just be more mindful of what you're eating and why you're eating it and how and when. That ultimately is going to bring more positive than mass labeling foods and trying to pigeonhole it into certain groups. Because, like you said, whether or not you're in your sort of camp in terms of the view of products like Huel, or in my camp, or in the and again, actually, it's a slight tangent, but you referenced Tonic Health. I always laugh at the fact that he likes to demonize ultra processed foods, but also does provide a load of what would essentially be ultra processed supplements and products. So
just on that, I have had a linking correspondence with DM, and he has agreed to debate me, but then when I started to organize it, it never happened, right? Whereas people I disagree with, obviously the disagreement you and I had was tiny. With me, it's considerable. With me and him, it's considerable. But I'm waiting.
Well, I look forward to seeing and hearing that, because I'd love to. No, it's not. But yeah, again, I think it's taking that more holistic approach, and rather than trying to kind of pigeonhole into good and bad, it's trying to focus on more.
Be mindful. And I think, when I nodded, I went, because like you good place to come to an end on, actually, mindful, right? There's a reason I call my eating strategy contemplative nutrition. I want people to pause and consider just a little about the food choices they're making. And that should absolutely include how they feel about it organoleptically, any cravings. Are they genuinely hungry rather than absent-mindedly eating it? But it should also be a little bit more of a we-centric perspective. Like, what their food choices are. I don't want people to stand in the supermarket too long thinking about what they're doing or even preparing, but just be slightly more mindful of everything that goes into that food. It's brilliant that we're in the third decade of the third millennium, and what we've got here is we don't have to work hard to get our food. We can. It's incredible. We should be celebrating this. This is amazing. But just as a society, Western society, we're just not doing it right, but we can.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of evolution that is coming. I think there's a lot of change, positive, that is coming. I think the challenge that we have is, and again, without starting a whole new conversation topic that keeps us here for another hour, there's that difficult balancing act that we've got at the moment. We've got the greatest access to information we've ever had, but we've also got the greatest amount of conflicting and misinformation being shared as a result. And that's probably born out of our inherent human nature to seek out convenience, which obviously from a from a Huel perspective taps into that quite nicely from a food perspective. But people like things to be quick and easy and readily available, and because of that, there's a lot of people that therefore don't challenge some of the questionable information out there, because it's easier to go, yes, I agree with that, I'll watch more of it, I don't agree with that.
And the algorithms are helping us, and that's something I'm with my friend Robbie Lockie, who's running the Freedom Food Alliance. I don't know if you've heard about that, and foodmax.org, right? You know, Robbie's very kindly invited me to be one of his advisors on there, and it's I love what he's doing. People should look that up. We haven't got time to talk about it now, but foodfacts.org and the Freedom Food Alliance is really interesting. We're trying to combat nutrition misinformation, and Robbie is one of these hard vegans that you described, but he's brought a load of people together who disagree, but I disagree on a high rung level, you know. They but we agree that misinformation is a problem, a real big problem, and that's what we're unanimous on, and that's really good. But just one thing I wanted to say earlier on, I think it's a good point to round up on. We're talking about evidence-based here, and we've alluded to it a couple of times, both of us have, that this is just an idea, a thought we had, and it's not really evidence-based. And I want to emphasize that's okay. Conjecture is great, conjecture is science. The only thing you must do is just caveat and say that you know, this isn't evidence-based, this is just my idea. And when I said at the beginning about nutrition being more polarizing than politics, that's just, I can't back that up. But you know, and I think that's just an important point. When we say we're evidence-based, we don't always have to be evidence-based. We can have ideas and thoughts that come to mind. We should just caveat them that they are just that.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem, isn't it? You know, and like I said, it's a great place to end, because there are a lot of people out there that position opinion as fact, and it's fine. You should be able to share your opinion on subjects, but make people aware that it's an opinion and it's not gospel fact. But in the world of social media, people like to appease the algorithm by aggressively positioning an opinion as a fact, and safe in the knowledge that it's going to stimulate a fuckload of engagement, basically. But thankfully we've got forums like this where we can sit together. We don't have to agree on everything. We can have a civil conversation. We can agree on a lot, and hopefully share some information that just allows people to think a little bit more freely for themselves and come to a well-informed decision, which is ultimately what we all want.
Exactly. And I think the comments you'll get in this will be like, interesting conversation, guys, and you know, they've got different perspectives from both of us, right?
Absolutely.
We've agreed on most stuff today, really, haven't we?
We absolutely have. And to be fair, I was acutely aware that we probably agree on 98% of things, because you know, we're coming at it from the same place. But honestly, I'm so grateful. Thank you for coming on.
I'm grateful for him. I said everyone, it's a pleasure being invited onto these things. It's an absolute privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. So before we round off, again, I do it every time, so just let people know where they can find you, and who you are, and
Instagram, James Collier, RNUTR, registered nutritionist. Same on TikTok. LinkedIn is another one, James Collier. You'll find me quite easily. The book Well Fed, available at all major book retailers. It's on Amazon and everything like that. That'll be, you know, it's great. Or if books aren't for them, but they do want to read some of my work, I keep Substack called Thought for Food. Everything there's free. It will remain free. I don't post a lot, but what I do post is quite, hopefully, thought-provoking. It's not the tip stuff. It's stuff. I write the Substack more for me. It's a mess in there, and if I write it, it unjumbles a mess. But writing's not enough. You have to publish it, because they get you to a higher level of account. So so if people want to read my work, Substack is the place to follow me.
Amazing, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. And whilst we're doing little book plugs, I've got mine behind me. If you want to grab it, it's on Amazon. It's called How to Stop Being a Fat Cunt. Give it a read. But James, it's been amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll get you on again, because there's so much to dig into on so many of the topics that I think.
Yeah, we could have done community eating and stuff like this, and we can talk more mental health and well-being side of it. Maybe we can do an in-person one when I'm come down to Bournemouth.
Mate, 100%. Let me know when you're down, and I'll make you up a nice mojito for your troubles.
Yeah.
But
cheers.
thanks very much for thanks for listening. Make sure you give it a like, a share, and all of that good stuff. And I will see you on the next one.